Every nation on this planet carries debt. America's burden stands at $38 trillion. Japan shoulders $9 trillion. Across the globe, the total reaches $315 trillion. This sum is 3 times larger than everything humanity produces in a year. Yet here's what should unsettle you deeply. When everyone owes, who exactly holds the claim? The truth runs deeper than you imagine. Trace the chain backward, follow each creditor to their source. You'll discover something profound that changes everything. Nobody in particular owns this debt. Instead, the world owes itself. 4 individuals across 300 years engineered this exact arrangement. These architects constructed a framework where repayment becomes impossible, where nations borrow eternally, where interest climbs forever upward. This isn't speculation or theory. Documentation exists for every meeting, every contract, every structural element. Understanding their blueprint reveals why 38 trillion represents not a problem. It's a system performing precisely as intended. The machine works exactly as they designed it. Before 1694, monarchs borrowed through straightforward methods. They'd approach wealthy merchants or nobility. They'd promise repayment with interest. Sometimes they'd fail to pay completely. When default occurred, lenders absorbed losses. Risk fell on creditors, embarrassment on royalty. Yet the arrangement remained contained. Obligations were temporary, either satisfied or abandoned. The system cleared itself naturally. Money moved in predictable finite cycles. William Paterson transformed this entire structure. A Scottish merchant who'd experienced multiple failed ventures. He conceived an idea in 1691. This idea would reshape civilization itself. England fought France while King William desperately needed funds. The treasury held nothing. Tax income couldn't match military expenses. Traditional lenders refused new agreements. England had broken promises before. Paterson presented the king with an unprecedented proposal. He would organize wealthy merchants. They would provide £1.2 million, roughly 300 million in contemporary value. An enormous amount for that era. The revolutionary element wasn't the loan itself. The government would never repay the principal sum. Instead, they'd pay 8% interest annually, forever, without end. To manage this arrangement, Paterson proposed something new, an entirely new institution called the Bank of England. The mechanics were unprecedented in human history. Merchant lenders would deposit their gold, the Bank of England would hold it, the institution would lend it to government would pay yearly interest from tax collections, the bank would distribute that interest. It would go to the original lenders. The critical innovation was simple yet profound. Government wouldn't ever repay the actual borrowed sum. The loan existed permanently, eternally. Why would merchants accept such terms? Parliament guaranteed the interest payment. The government's power to tax citizens backed everything, as long as England could collect taxes. Interest would flow reliably, year after year. Additionally, the banknotes merchants received became tradable. They functioned as money itself. Actually superior to money, they generated interest continuously. Parliament approved Paterson's scheme in 1694. The Bank of England received its charter. Merchants provided their gold. Government obtained war funding immediately, for the first time in recorded history. National debt became a permanent feature. What people miss is why this benefited bankers. The government paid £96,000 yearly. On 1.2 million, forever. Merchants had purchased a government annuity. As long as England existed, money flowed. If they wanted gold returned, options existed. They could sell the notes to others. Debt became transferable, yet never repayable. This was the innovation, a perpetual money machine. Paterson's true genius emerged next. The Bank of England received special authority to issue paper notes. These were backed by government debt. They could print currency up to the loan's value. This created money from obligation. Government promises became circulating currency. Greater government borrowing enabled more money creation. This established the fundamental template, the blueprint every nation would follow. Brilliant for bankers, catastrophic for citizens. Citizens paying interest on obligations that never disappear. Within 50 years, replication began. Every major European power copied the model. France established the Banque Générale. The Netherlands formalized government debt issuance. By 1790, America adopted identical structures. Alexander Hamilton explicitly modeled American finance. He copied the Bank of England directly. Permanent obligations, tax-funded interest, bonds functioning as currency. Paterson died in 1719. He left without particular wealth. Despite creating the Bank of England, yet his system persists today, 331 years later. The Bank of England still operates. British government debt has never been satisfied. It's been refinanced, rolled forward, expanded, never eliminated, never paid off. The trap was set in 1694. Every government since has entered willingly. By the early 1800s, European governments embraced borrowing completely for wars, infrastructure, and operations. Yet no organized market existed. Each loan required individual negotiation. Interest rates fluctuated wildly. Only the wealthiest merchants could participate. Then Nathan Rothschild industrialized sovereign debt. The Rothschild family began as money changers in Frankfurt, Germany. By 1800, 5 Rothschild brothers existed. They established banking operations in 5 cities: London, Paris, Frankfurt, Vienna, Naples. This network was unprecedented in scope. They could transfer money across borders. Faster than anyone else, they used this advantage completely to dominate sovereign lending entirely. Nathan Rothschild in London proved strategic, the genius of the family. During the Napoleonic Wars, Nathan arranged loans, British loans with revolutionary structure, a structure that changed everything. Instead of lending directly to government, he purchased government bonds at discount, then resold them to investors at markup. He created a secondary market, a market that transformed sovereign finance. Government received money immediately. Rothschild collected the price difference. Investors acquired tradable assets. The innovation accelerated everything. But darker elements emerged quickly. Rothschild didn't merely finance governments. He positioned himself strategically, so governments had no alternative. They had to use him. In 1815 at Waterloo came the moment. Nathan Rothschild learned of Napoleon's defeat before anyone else in London. His courier network exceeded official channels in speed and reliability. He used this information advantage deliberately. He sold British bonds heavily, signaling Britain was losing the war. Prices collapsed as panic spread. Other investors sold frantically. After prices crashed completely, Rothschild bought. He bought massive quantities at rock-bottom levels. When victory news arrived the next day, bond prices surged dramatically upward. Rothschild made millions instantly. Through information control and market timing, this established the Rothschild model completely. Control information flow, control debt issuance, control the market itself. By 1820, domination was complete. The Rothschilds dominated European sovereign debt. Governments needing to borrow went through them. They controlled the investor network. They possessed the distribution channels. They set all the terms. Here's why this matters profoundly. Before Rothschild, governments could theoretically refuse payment. If a monarch defaulted, creditors absorbed losses. The system reset naturally. But Rothschild changed everything fundamentally. He made sovereign debt tradable. Across national borders, internationally, a British bond might be owned by French investors, who sold it to German banks, who used it as collateral. The ownership web became complex, incredibly, impossibly complex. Defaulting wasn't simply refusing one creditor. It meant collapsing an entire network, an international financial network. This represents the Rothschild innovation. Make debt so interconnected that default becomes impossible, not because governments are responsible, but because default triggers systemic collapse. Governments became trapped completely. They had to continue paying. They had to keep borrowing to pay interest on previous debts. The trap was no longer merely permanent. It became inescapable completely. The Rothschild family wealth peaked. During the mid-1800s, they were the wealthiest family globally, richer than any monarchy anywhere. That wealth derived from one source, interest on sovereign debt exclusively. They produced nothing tangible, built nothing physical at all. They lent money to governments and collected interest eternally. The system Patterson created in 1694, Rothschild industrialized by 1815. Every European government was caught, trapped in the web completely. By 1900, America was rising, becoming an economic powerhouse, despite having primitive financial structures. Banks operated independently, disconnected. Money supply remained tied to gold. No central mechanism managed debt. J.P. Morgan fixed that situation, not for public benefit, but to protect his empire. In 1907, panic struck. Stock prices crashed violently. Banks failed across the nation. The economy seized completely. J.P. Morgan personally organized rescue. He gathered major New York bankers in his library, behind locked doors, forced them to pledge funds to stabilize failing institutions. It worked successfully, brilliantly. The panic ended with Morgan in control. Morgan became America's de facto banker. But he was 70 years old. He knew he couldn't repeat this. So Morgan and Associates designed permanence, a permanent solution to banking crises. They needed a central bank. But Americans hated central banks. Intensely, viscerally, completely. The first and second banks had been shut down by opposition. So Morgan's group disguised intention. In 1910, Associates met secretly, including Senator Nelson Aldrich, representatives from the largest banks. On Jekyll Island, Georgia, for 9 days they designed what would become Federal Reserve. The meetings remained secret necessarily. Public discovery would trigger riots. Americans would never accept banker control. The plan was brilliant manipulation. The Federal Reserve wouldn't be called a central bank at all. It would be named a Federal Reserve System instead. It wouldn't be one institution. but 12 regional banks, not controlled by Wall Street, but overseen by presidential appointees. It appeared decentralized, democratic, public, but the structure ensured control. Banker control completely, absolutely. Regional Federal Reserve banks were privately owned by member banks. Those banks elected regional boards. Regional feds elected the Federal Reserve Board. Government appointed some members. But bankers controlled, fundamentally. The most important power existed, creating money and buying bonds. This was given to New York, the Federal Reserve Bank there. Controlled by Wall Street banks, Morgan's banks specifically, the Federal Reserve Act passed Congress. December 1913 came quickly. Most representatives didn't understand what they approved that day. Immediately, the debt trap expanded. Government didn't just borrow from banks. It borrowed from the Federal Reserve, which could create money, to buy bonds infinitely, creating unlimited demand for debt. Here's why this matters profoundly. Before the Federal Reserve existed, limits existed on government borrowing. Banks only had finite money to lend to anyone, but the Federal Reserve could create money by purchasing bonds. Government issues a bond instrument. The Fed buys with created money. Government spends that money immediately. The debt goes on Fed's sheet, backed by nothing except promise, the promise that taxpayers service forever. This mechanism enables infinite debt. The Federal Reserve ensures always. There's always a buyer waiting, always demand for government bonds. So government never stops borrowing. It can roll over eternally, because the Fed always purchases. Interest payments flow from taxpayers to banks that own Federal Reserve. Morgan died in 1913, the same year Federal Reserve created. His legacy is the structure, enabling current $38 trillion debt. Without the Federal Reserve existing, government couldn't borrow at scale. The market wouldn't support it, but with Fed as buyer, no limit exists at all. The debt trap became infinite. By the 1970s arrived, the trap was functioning globally. Every developed nation borrowed continuously, rolled over debt, and paid interest. But developing nations were different. They borrowed for infrastructure projects. Many couldn't maintain payments. The debt trap was reaching limits until Paul Volcker made permanence. Volcker was Federal Reserve Chairman from 79 to 87. He faced a serious problem. Inflation exceeded 10%. U.S. credibility was eroding rapidly. Foreign governments lost faith in the dollar's stability. He needed to stop inflation, even if it meant recession. So in 79, Volcker raised interest rates dramatically high. Federal funds rate went from 11 to 20%, highest ever. This crushed inflation completely, but it had another effect. Developing nations had borrowed billions in dollars during the 70s, when rates were low, manageable. Now those loans were due. Interest rates had tripled completely. Mexico owed $80 billion. Brazil $60 billion total. Argentina $40 billion owed. They couldn't pay anymore. Interest alone exceeded export revenues. In August 82, Mexico announced it couldn't make payments anymore, default declaration. This should have triggered collapse, global financial collapse everywhere. American banks had lent most. If Mexico defaulted, Citibank fails. Bank of America takes losses. Chase Manhattan collapses potentially. The entire banking system risked. Volcker could have let happen, let banks take losses, let the market clear naturally. But he didn't do that. Instead, he orchestrated bailout through the International Monetary Fund. The IMF would lend Mexico, Brazil, Argentina, and others enough money to keep paying interest to American banks. The loans were called structural adjustment loans specifically. They came with severe conditions, brutal conditions in practice. Governments had to cut spending, privatize state assets completely, open markets to foreign investment, devalue currencies dramatically, essentially dismantle economic sovereignty. In exchange for money, the IMF loans didn't reduce debt at all. They just rolled it over, made it manageable but permanent. This is the Volcker innovation. When debt becomes unpayable completely, don't forgive it ever, restructure it instead, lend enough to keep flowing, interest payments flowing upward, and extract political concessions, economic concessions in exchange. The debt trap became control, a tool of political control. Countries that couldn't pay anymore were forced to open economies, sell their assets cheaply, submit to foreign policy, in exchange for the privilege of staying in debt. This pattern has repeated 40 years. Greece in 2010, Argentina in 2001, Sri Lanka in 2022. Every time the same structure. IMF loans to keep paying, austerity imposed on populations, sovereignty surrendered completely. The debt never eliminated, just restructured and made perpetual. Volcker died in 2019, but his legacy is mechanism, ensuring trap is global and completely inescapable. Even when countries can't pay, they're not allowed to default. They're refinanced into permanent indebtedness. The interest keeps flowing upward, to creditors, to banks, the same institutions always, the same system Patterson created in 1694. Now you see how. 4 architects built a system where debt is infinite, Start with Patterson's model first. Government borrows, pays interest forever, never repays principal amount. Add Rothschild's innovation next, make debt tradable globally. So it's not one creditor, but a complex web. Default collapses the system entirely. Add Morgan's mechanism then. Central banks create money to buy government bonds infinitely, creating unlimited demand always. Government can always borrow more. Add Volcker's trap finally. When countries can't pay, restructure but don't forgive. Keep the interest flowing continuously. The result is what exists. 315 trillion debt, government debt, corporate debt, household debt. None will ever be repaid. All of it pays interest, all connected through the system. Default anywhere threatens collapse. Collapse everywhere simultaneously. The US government issues debt, 38 trillion in total, about 20 trillion owned by the American public through pension funds, mutual funds, insurance companies, banks, Federal Reserve. These institutions buy treasury bonds, considered safe assets always. But those bonds pay interest, about 1 trillion per year. That interest comes from taxes. Taxpayers send money to government. Government sends it to bondholders. The bondholders are mostly institutions owned by the wealthy. It's a transfer from workers to capital every year, forever, without end. The other 18 trillion is owed to government itself. Social Security Trust Fund, Medicare Trust Fund holdings. The government borrowed from programs, spent the money already. Now it owes itself. But ultimately, taxpayers owe. Because when Social Security needs to redeem those bonds, the government has to raise taxes or borrow more to pay. It's a shell game. But the interest flows regardless. Now scale it globally. Japan owes 9 trillion, mostly to Japanese institutions. Europe owes 14 trillion, mostly to European banks. China owes significant domestic debt, held by state banks. Every country runs the same. They're all interconnected completely. Japan holds US treasuries. The US holds European bonds. Europe holds developing nation debt. It's circular completely. Everyone owes everyone else. The interest flows upward to institutions that manage. Here's why this never ends. If US paid off debt, money supply would collapse. Dollars are created when borrowing. If debt paid off, those dollars would disappear. Deflation, depression, economic collapse follows. So government can never pay. It has to keep borrowing, keep rolling it over, keep paying interest eternally. The same is true globally. If every government paid off, the global money supply shrinks by 2/3 immediately. There wouldn't be enough money to conduct trade anywhere. The system would seize completely, so debt can't be eliminated. It's structural and necessary, by design, by intention. Here's who profits from this. The institutions that hold debt. BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street, Fidelity. These asset managers control trillions. They buy government bonds with other people's money. Pension funds, retirement accounts, insurance premiums. They collect the interest, about 1 trillion per year, from US debt alone, plus interest from Japan, Europe. That trillion per year flows from taxpayers to bondholders. It's the largest wealth transfer. In history, continuous and structural. Invisible to most people, because it's not called tax, it's called debt service. But it's the same mechanism. Workers pay, institutions collect. The debt never decreases. The four architects didn't conspire. They lived in different centuries, but they each solved problems in ways that benefited bankers. Each solution built on previous. Patterson made debt permanent in 1694. Rothschild made it global in 1815. Morgan made it infinite in 1913. Volcker made it inescapable in 1982. Together they built a system where governments borrow forever. The people who control bonds, who manage the debt, who collect the interest, they're the ultimate beneficiaries. Not governments, not taxpayers. 38 trillion isn't a crisis. It's a business model. Every dollar of debt is an asset on balance sheets. It pays interest continuously. It provides collateral for borrowing. As long as confidence holds, as long as people believe, government will pay interest, even without repaying principal. The system functions perfectly. The debt trap is complete. Escape isn't possible without collapsing the entire system. 4 architects, 3 centuries, 1 system.